Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, both online and in this conference room to celebrate the 40 years of Cirad in Paris. My name is Marie-Laurence Laurier, Delegate for Communication of Cirad, and will be the MC today and the timekeeper, incidentally. So welcome to this beautiful auditorium of the Le Monde group. We are very happy about this partnership. You all know Le Monde. Most of you read it. It's really a reference media in this topic and others. So the partnership will be celebrated, and after 6:30 there will be a public conference on the same thing: how to feed these 10 billion people, human beings, without destroying the planet. And the partnership is also 2 pages in Le Monde today, which you were offered on entering this room, on pages 12 and 13, on this topic, talking about agroecology with beautiful experiences in Vietnam. And these some more articles were published yesterday and on Twitter. So without further ado, I will call to the stage the chair and CEO of Cirad, Mrs. Claverie de Saint-Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, dear MPs and partners from afar, I have in mind our partners from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Dear directors of public research institutions, universities, public partners, NGOs, think tanks and private sector, and dear colleagues of Cirad present here and online, and all those following us today. I will say a few words of introductions for this celebration of the 40th anniversary. First, I will tell you about the road we have gone through since the creation of Cirad, and second, tomorrow's Cirad, which we are preparing, and this the theme for the public conference that will be taking place later on. So Cirad was established in 1984. The decree establishing this organization dates back to June 1984. We spoke about this during the anniversary sequence in Montpellier, but it's a much longer history that predates the establishment of our body, 100th century, because Cirad results from the merger of 9 technical institutes about tropical agronomy in particular, institutes that were created around 1920 to strengthen the knowledge of agricultural and forestry operations in tropical areas. In 1990, Cirad succeeded in transforming a tool, which we must admit it is a colonial tool, into a cooperation tool. And in so doing, further strengthened its work of agricultural orientation as part of the technical assistance to newly independent states with new scientific partners, and this by building up all the research partnerships that are still well alive today as part of the global changes that we have gone through, so that throughout these years we have ramped up our work with our partners to better address their needs, but also to address the global questions of our planet. If I read the decree that created our mission statement, it was to contribute to the rural development of hot regions in the world with scientific and technical cooperation, international cooperation. And we did much more than that. Over these 4 decades, the people of Cirad have embraced the needs and expectations of these populations, including the new challenges such as the globalization, the ramping up of so-called emerging countries, with which we work, but may be also competitors with poorer countries, the urbanization of societies with health, food safety and security, and the continuous emergence, with shuttling back and forth sometimes, of the environmental questions that we have never ceased to work on, including when it was not already fashionable, plus social justice as a major overarching theme. We also tried to work on scientific questions. There are ethical dimensions, in particular like the genome edition, and we always wanted to cast some light on a topic that was very European focused by turning the light to the southern countries. Cirad has also broadened his focuses of interest and broadened its scientific skills in the 1990s and 2000. The increasing awareness of these environmental challenges, which were very strong at the Cirad. We were, in a way, forced to beef up our teams in terms of impact on the environment of agricultural activities, and therefrom to think about the question of water, biodiversity, with an increasing focus on the interface between science and decisions in these areas. So the broadening of these scientific areas, which was quite notable when we created Cirad, there were three major themes: agronomy, forestry, and cattle breeding sciences. We have more than 40 streams of work now, with an increasing cross-disciplinary approach, with also the involvement of human sciences and social sciences. So more scientific disciplines and more focus on in the environment and the south. And also we have scaled up our work by working on the gene to the plot to the organization of agricultural markets. These evolutions from a scientific point of view, in terms of our terms of reference as well, resulted in a positive impact as part of our mission, and a definite impact, I would say. To quote but a few, I would say that we have succeeded in making agriculture and the food systems in the South more sustainable and resilient. We have contributed to this. We have also contributed to the eradication of animal and vegetal diseases. We have continued to work on the protection of biodiversity and the sustainable management of natural resources. We have reinforced the links between science and decision making, and we have trained thousands of scientists in the north, but also in the south, and we are very proud of this. Over these 40 years of existence, there was a main thread that is very much our identity and our DNA, is the partnership, a multifaceted partnership anchored in the presence of southern researchers in northern institutions like ours, crossed presence with researchers from Cirad who are hosted in south-based institutions and a great variety of PhD students, etc., and researchers. So we have Cirad people present in over 60 countries. We have a network that we keep on strengthening, and a road as alliance promoters. So this partnership, which is at the heart of our DNA, is certainly going to continue to be our hallmark and make up tomorrow's Cirad. Cirad for tomorrow, that's my second point. We wanted to help addressing the problematics related to global changes. When we see the multiple crises, the COP29 had just illustrated this. Another COP, more positive in terms of results before, But we see that there's increasing food insecurity, and we see all these public crises call for more scientific data, for a cross-disciplinary approach that takes into account scientific data, the expectations of the population, the working, the operation, the way societies live, with the link between culture, agriculture, food, and global healthcare. Our vision for tomorrow is to speed up, to boost the diversification of the tools of research in close relationship with our partners to find solutions, whether technical journeys or data to better identify the problems, or be it also perhaps support from the private sector to create jobs with ethical considerations as to the way we accompany the private sector, to accompany also the social and solidarity society, and this approach where we help, we catalyze, we are catalysts of converging efforts for a more sustainable world is our vision, and that which we want to put to you. This takes me to the theme of this celebration, the theme of the major debate, how to feed healthily and sustainably a population of 10 billion people by 2050 in the context of climate change and other crises. We've chosen this theme because it's at the heart of our mission. It is the very foundation of food security. And let me return to also, there's a feeling of indignation. There is the growth of people in a situation not of food insecurity, but acute hunger at a time when elsewhere in the world there is overproduction. Millions and millions of people don't have enough to eat, and their life is at stake. And at the same time, we are destroying an environment at a pace like nowhere before. So a degradation of our resources and the resources of our future generations. So this problem that we are faced with requires not a ready-made answer that could also be a pessimistic response or cynical or self-centered response. It calls for a strengthened response of science. We are an institution of applied science. In other words, our objective is to change resolutely the deal of these 700 million of people that have not enough to eat, who are hungry today. And we believe that with you, who represent organizations that we work hand in hand with, our governing bodies, our donors, with your help and your support, we believe we can contribute to addressing this crisis, and already in the very short term to inform the public opinion, which is more than ever key. And we'll see how this helps us rethink our relation to agriculture, health, global healthcare, etc. And by way of conclusion to this introduction, I would say that more than ever we need research, we need facts and dialogue. Thank you. So I will now call to the Deputy General Director for Innovation and Research of the Ministry of Higher Education and Research, Mrs. Borrell, for the French government. Good afternoon, dear directors of Cirad and representative of the various ministries, members of Parliament, members of the public and private world, researchers. It's a great pleasure for me to take the floor today in the name of the Ministry of Higher Education and Research, the French government, for the 40-year anniversary celebration of Cirad. The minister in charge could unfortunately not join us today, so we are here in the prestigious premises of Le Monde group to celebrate 4 decades of research and innovation at the service of sustainable development and food security worldwide. Since its creation in 1984, Cirad has really embodied, as you have just said, a unique model of scientific collaboration with countries of the South. By being present in tropical and Mediterranean regions, Cirad is developing solutions that are adapted to the local context and contribute to taking up scientific challenges that are specific to these regions in terms of climate resilience and food security, but also by working hand in hand with international organizations such as CGR, which is based in Montpellier, very close to the laboratories of Cirad. This cooperation is also part of a more global dynamics. So together these players share complementary expertise to address their problems. Cirad is also very much committed to participative science, and this is something that is key to Cirad by integrating local knowledge, expertise, by working together directly with the field players. It allows innovation to be adapted to local conditions and sustainable, plus aid to development through training programs and transfer of competence. This has further increased the autonomy of these partnering countries. Also present in overseas territories and departments, Cirad plays a very key role in the development of scientific cooperation between the French territories and their respective oceanic basins by developing partnerships adapted to the local environmental challenges and agricultural challenges too. Among the achievements that are testament to the expertise of the Cirad in these areas for concrete solutions adapted to the needs of territories, we could quote 3 examples: the integrated fight against pests in West Africa for the cotton industry, the work in Amazonia, or the sustainable management of sugarcane in Reunion Island. Now, when we have billions of new inhabitants on our planet by 2050 who will be joining us, we have a number of challenges: sustainable access to healthy food. The fight against climate change are no longer choices but a necessity. However, these challenges are part of a multi-crisis context: health, social, geopolitical, and other that interact with one another and further aggravate the overall situation. And these crises have highlighted the vulnerability of our food system. And this topic will be at the core of our discussions this afternoon. The program brings together international leaders and experts to think about these necessary transformations. Several fundamental questions are in front of us today: geopolitical systems, questions of food through research and academic. How can we anticipate the tensions on the natural resources and develop innovative solutions to improve the situation of the most vulnerable countries? What is the role for academics and institutions in structuring the knowledge of global policies and knowledge for the global management of resources? Also, how to cope with emergencies. This is an important system. How higher education and research can reconcile the need to have immediate responses to crises with the need to have longer-term approaches and visions. What tools, what methodological frameworks can be used by the research laboratory to impose sustainability in the political agendas? The strengthening of scientific partnerships with countries of the South is also very key in this context. How can we design programs, training, education, research programs that are based on an equal basis with on an equal footing with the countries of the South? What institutions can be called upon to encourage this collaboration, direct collaborations with the local population and researchers to mutualize our respective knowledge? I will quote the program for agroeconomy and ecology curriculum developed between Cirad and several universities of West Africa. It's all based on co-construction, which implies local researchers, teachers from partner countries, plus decision makers at the political level. So all these challenges call for reinforcement of our local, of the capacity building at local level, reinforce local institutions, develop endogenous knowledge, which are key drivers to develop a future for tomorrow, a sustainable future. The challenges will be even more demanding in the years to come, but with the experience we have acquired and developed and the passion of our teams and the collaboration with your partners from the South, I am certain that we can take up this challenge successfully. You are a model and you are a source of inspiration for many other institutions elsewhere. You have shown that it's possible that you can put innovation and scientific research at the service of a sustainable future while remaining in touch with the needs of the local population that you serve. And the ministry, our Ministry of Higher Education and Research, is fully behind you. We believe that research should be at the core of public policy to guarantee a sustainable and fair future for our populations. And this is how we can develop more resilient and inclusive food systems. So in the name of the Higher Education and Research Ministry, I would like to extend my warmest thanks to all the teams of Cirad and your partners, dear President Elizabeth, and all the experts and partners present today for your exemplary involvement in the face of these challenges awaiting us. But with these initiatives that you have carried together, we have good hope we can bring a harmonious response to all these. So I wish you a very fruitful conference with fruitful debates so that these discussions can bring us together to address the needs of this planet. Thank you. We now continue with a video presentation of the Secretary of State for Francophonie and International Partnerships at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, Mr. Mohamed Swali.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. C'est avec une grande joie que nous célébrons les 40 ans du Cirad et j'en profite pour lui souhaiter un très bon anniversaire. La France peut être fière d'avoir le Cirad qui s'illustre comme un acteur incontournable du développement durable à l'échelle internationale. En mettant la recherche scientifique au service des défis agricoles, alimentaires, environnementaux, vous avez su conjuguer innovation, expertise et solidarité. J'ai pu m'en rendre compte moi-même encore dernièrement au Maroc, où j'étais aux côtés de sa présidente, Elisabeth Clavry de Saint-Martin. Le Cirad accompagne les transitions agroécologiques, favorise la sécurité alimentaire et contribue à la lutte contre le changement climatique, tout en soutenant les pays du Sud dans leur développement. Votre capacité à construire des partenariats solides, à partager vos savoirs et à proposer des solutions adaptées aux réalités locales fait de vous un modèle d'excellence et de coopération. À l'occasion de cet anniversaire, je tiens à saluer tout particulièrement l'engagement et le professionnalisme de tous les agents du Cirad. Grâce à votre passion, à votre rigueur et à votre dévouement, vous donnez vie à cette mission essentielle. Vous portez haut les valeurs de la recherche au service de nos partenaires de par le monde. Je vous adresse mes plus vives félicitations pour ce parcours exceptionnel et mes encouragements pour les années à venir. Continuez à faire votre mission avec cette même ambition, cette même énergie. Joyeux anniversaire.
Very happy anniversary to you. And to close this introduction sequence, I call to the floor the head of global affairs of the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Grone Catalona. Dear President Elizabeth, the Deputy Director for the Higher Education and Research Ministry, ladies and gentlemen, and dear MPs, I'm happy to come here this afternoon for this half day of celebration, but also reflection to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Cirad here in the auditorium of Le Monde, which I think is a proper illustration of the proximity of Cirad with society. As the work of journalism that starts from the observation of a field reality, here you are very keen to deliver science of impact in order to serve the local needs of South population and those of obviously the Secretary of Francophonie and international partners just now highlighted this need with the transformation called about by climate change, the capacity of Cirad to diversify its partnerships and approaches in terms of training, research, evaluation of impact, and support to public policies. All this for the South and with the South. This is the very specificity of Cirad, one of the operators that is dear to the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs. Cirad, and within the French team, is a spearhead of our French policy in terms of solidarity investment and sustainable investment and scientific diplomacy as well. Your work is not aligned but is unfolded within and along our policy for sustainable and solidarity investments, which we recalled in July 2023 as part of the CICID meeting. You contribute to the dialogue between science, politics, and society, and this is key. We are in particular keen also on the work you conduct in partnership with other operators of the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs. I have in mind IRD and IFD on the strategic problematics that are at the core of our collective objective for the 2030 agenda. One global healthcare, for instance, the protection of agricultural and forestry assets, the agroecological transition, mitigation of climate change, nutrition and food systems, and many others. Also, I would like to commend in the name of our ministry the signing of a framework agreement that was just renewed for the collaboration between Cirad and all of the AFD group. This renewed partnership between the French Development Agency is fully in line with our objective to strengthen the synergies between the players of the French so-called team. Cirad, over its 40 years of existence, has developed a very rich and diverse network of partners, both public and private, like producers, cooperatives, international organizations, some of which are also interacting with our ministry, and also civil society, the private sector, and local authorities of over 100 countries in over 4 continents. Therefore, you are a major player of all these cooperation networks that have developed across the world. The wealth and diversity of this network are a real strength and for your impact and upscaling the contributions here to sustainable development in the South. You have taken into account the needs of your partners, and this is fundamental, and you continue to do so. And you're always very careful and keen to adapt innovative solutions to the needs of your partners, in particular in the South. As you may know, and this echoes the theme that will be discussed later on today, feeding 10 billion of inhabitants by 2050 is our challenge, and the French President of the Republic confirmed a few days ago in Latin America that France would take part in this alliance against poverty and hunger, and the expertise of Cirad in terms of health, security and nutritional safety, in particular with the achievement of the SDG number 2 will be very key to the work of this alliance that has just been inaugurated with the support of France. The dynamism of Cirad is also demonstrated by a number of international scale actions, most of the time co-constructed with our partners of the South, like the One Earth Vision, which was launched in 2023, the research initiative SARA. Those who take part in this will know who they are, and the PRISOD initiative also. And Elizabeth Clavier Saint-Martin just mentioned the COP29 that was just held in Baku, whose results are certainly not quite up to what we may have expected, but however, are better than nothing, because there would have been a risk of coming out of there with nothing at all. So you also contribute to this, and I would like also to quote the upcoming COP16 on diversification, and I understand that Cirad will be taking part in the work that is to take in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh around this theme of desertification. So these are but a few examples of themes and initiatives that you have contributed to, and it is really, really invaluable. And at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, we know we can count on your scientific contribution to prepare these international events, but also those that France will host in next year. I have 2 events in mind in particular where your contribution, your input will be very valuable. The Summit for Action on Artificial Intelligence, and there's Nutrition for Growth Summit that is to take place in March next year, 2025, in Paris, where Cirad will be contributing a very precious input. So I wish you most fruitful discussion this afternoon, and most importantly, I wish Cirad and all its members, staff, administrative personnel across the world, I wish you all a beautiful 40th anniversary and another 40 years ahead of you for your mission. Thank you.
Il est temps maintenant de faire un voyage dans le passé.
Now let's travel in the past. It's not too far, don't worry. Not back to our ancestors, but it's the 5th of June 1984.
L'agriculture, ça contribue également à la santé, à la sécurité alimentaire, aux conditions de vie des petits producteurs. C'est vraiment un tout.
En 1984, le Cirad voit le jour avec la fusion de 9 instituts de recherche. Sa mission ? Contribuer au développement rural des régions chaudes, à l'étranger et dans l'outre-mer.
On a besoin aujourd'hui d'inventer des solutions propres à chaque territoire.
À la croisée de la recherche scientifique et de la coopération internationale, le Cirad devient rapidement un acteur majeur de la recherche mondiale en agronomie tropicale. Dans les années 90-2000, l'urgence écologique s'ancre de plus en plus dans les consciences. Le Cirad s'empare de ces nouvelles questions en étudiant les impacts environnementaux des activités agricoles et forestières. Pour mieux répondre à ces nouveaux défis, il élargit ses domaines de recherche et intègre de nombreuses disciplines, notamment issues des sciences humaines. Dans les années 2010, la reconnaissance de Montpellier comme capitale mondiale de la recherche agronomique et sa participation à de grands événements internationaux font du Cirad un acteur majeur de la diplomatie scientifique française et de l'aide au développement par la recherche. Le Cirad et ses partenaires ont toujours mené une science utile, source d'innovation et de changement. Une science engagée pour des agricultures résilientes et durables et animée par la culture de l'impact.
Cette culture et cette pratique de l'évaluation est tout à fait nécessaire pour rendre compte de nos impacts dans nos pays d'intervention.
Voilà 40 ans que le Cirad noue de nombreux partenariats avec des acteurs très divers.
Grâce au partenariat, on produit, on conçoit, on réalise des projets différemment et nous le pensons plus efficacement.
Les dispositifs de recherche et de formation en partenariat initiés en 2006 favorisent aujourd'hui la coopération sud-sud à une échelle régionale sans équivalent. Des équipes pluridisciplinaires, une excellence scientifique mondialement reconnue, un savoir-faire en recherche participative, une expertise pour faire participer ensemble tout type d'acteurs à la gouvernance de leur territoire. Depuis sa création, les recherches du Cirad éclairent les politiques publiques locales ou internationales.
Santé, biodiversité et climat sont vraiment, véritablement liés. Il faut travailler sur l'ensemble de ces approches de façon globale.
C'est ce que fait le Cirad en s'engageant aux côtés des populations dans leur transition vers un monde plus sain, plus résilient, plus juste. Ensemble, relevons les défis de la planète pour bâtir un avenir durable et solidaire. « 40 ans de recherche partagée pour cultiver le monde de demain. »
Alors pour revenir,
So just to get back to this human adventure, I'm calling Philippe Petit-Guenin to the stage. 1 month ago, he was the delegate director in research and strategy at Cirad, and Jean-Paul Laclos, his successor in this position.
Bien, merci.
So, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. I think that this video is a clear example of the link about today's topic with 10 billion inhabitants on the planet by 2050, and it's the mission of Cirad. The mission of Cirad contributed to farming and effective food systems in tropical and subtropical regions. And I'd like to greet the partners from the various country representatives who are here today. We have our French counterparts from INRA who have just arrived, and partners from the south, Ivory Coast. I'd like to greet them. So that's a research that was conducted through partnerships, and this research has produced 3 types of outcomes and results. First, knowledge. Cirad is a research institution. We produce knowledge, and this specific knowledge should be applicable. And secondly, we support innovation systems, and we back up efficient innovation systems. And thirdly, we help the decision makers, because at the end of the day, decisions need to be made, and research in Cirad and with their partners contribute to the decision-making process as part of finalized research, 40 years of impact. This means we have to define the research questions as part of an impact study. And the work that we do with the partners, together we were able to identify 3 main levers for transformation in food, in farming and food systems. And these levers are represented by the 3 colleagues of the 3 departments of the Cirad when we opened the roundtable. So I will talk about it. So I'd like to talk about one of these 2 levers, which it's all started with a story, a long story, more than 40 years. As Elisabeth de Saint-Martin said, Cirad is 40 years old, but it's the hair of previous work performed in other institutes. Let me take an example with a food processor, agronomist, René Toletour. And from the year 60s in Senegal, he encouraged the researchers to step out of the research units to work with the farmers directly on the field. And along with them, they were able to co-design by sharing knowledge. They were able to co-design solutions in order to improve the efficiency and sustainability of farming. At the time, it was already about this sort of agroecological transition that is shedding light on all this broad knowledge. So it's a bit of an emotional moment. This gentleman was 100 years old on the 1st of July, and he's become the citizen of honor of the city of Montpellier for his whole career. And to me, he is still a strong symbol of the actions performed on the field along with the partners. Second example I'd like to give before I hand over to Jean-Paul. Let's travel to the other continent. Let's travel to Brazil, where another researcher, unfortunately, he passed away, Lucien Seguid, back in the 70s, started working in the Maranhão state in the north of Brazil, and along with the farmers there and national research in Brata and the local universities, they developed what we call labor-free systems in agriculture. And to develop such systems, they had to pull very refined knowledge on the biology of the grounds and the interaction between plants and the grounds and the interactions between plants themselves. Based on this, they were able to develop labor-free farming systems which have been used on millions of hectares and surface areas in mild areas and tropical areas. And that's quite an outstanding example of an impactful work of research. And before we finish about this, and you remember you had a position in Brazil. There's a scientist that you all know, Charles Darwin. At the end of his career, he worked a lot on the biology of the grounds, and which is not so well known. And he actually wrote a book that was published 150 years ago. And in this very book, he wrote, "Why spending time and energy plowing the grounds when the worms do it for free, just for you?" Small reminder, sometimes things are more complex than I actually looked compared to what you see in books. But I'd like to say that the labor-free system based on with seedlings under green cover, that's a pretty interesting case because it's quite a good example of the progression at Cirad. So our farming system has many assets versus the traditional systems used in Brazil, and it was used on large surfaces. The Cirad, supported by the AFDI, has developed research to adapt the direct seedling systems in different conditions: Southeast Asia, Madagascar, West Africa. And this work became key because it allowed to determine and create partnerships in every region. And then these networks were extended as part of partnerships under the Cirad. And this work allowed to shed more light and better understand on the impact of the semi-seedling, semi-direct seedling on the systems, and also to find out more about the most suitable green coverage in every region. So it was quite interesting, but however, we realized that such systems had to face many hampers and obstacles. They could be of technical nature as well as of economic or social nature. So these difficulties did fully help improve things, and there was raising a growing awareness among the agronomists at Cirad in order to foster work in social and human sciences, to develop integrated approaches in the design of farming systems. And this goes well beyond the technical aspects. So the scientific systems in Cirad have become very diversified over the last 40 years, as Elisabeth said earlier on. So these experiments led the Cirad to promote the agroecological tradition that systematically combines the joint construction of solutions supported by the local know-how of the stakeholders, including the socio-economical aspects with work performed on the plot of land and on the farm, but also in the territory and in the various sectors involved. Researchers are also interested in the product processing systems for the market through a systemic approach of this in a durable way. We know that farming is fast developing in a tropical area under the impact of climate change, the decreasing biodiversity, and also due to the geopolitical context. As a result, research has become all the more useful for Cirad in order to meet new challenges. The scientific the director of the 3 departments of Cirad, will briefly introduce the 3 levers on which the Cirad has done their research. Thank you. So we are reaching the very core aspect of the program. It's a roundtable on how to feed 10 billion human beings in 2050, challenges and solutions. So I'm calling the moderator of the roundtable to the floor, the deputy manager of the agricultural, rural development and biodiversity department, Sandra Verrière.
Bonjour à tous. J'attends quand même que le jingle soit fini.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I have the great honor to moderate this afternoon session. So we will have the opportunity to exchange, interact, and collectively ask questions about how we can feed a growing population in a healthy way. And soon we'll reach 10 billion inhabitants in 2050. So we'll have this context in mind with climate change, decreasing biodiversity, degrading land, and the multiple crises of sanitary, geographic, or geopolitical nature. So we'll talk about knowledge, innovation, solution, and decision assistance to decision making. So there will be 4 parts in the afternoon session. First, we'll start with the introduction with the 3 scientific departments of Cirad. Then we'll have the pleasure for the first roundtable to welcome a group of scientists. They come from very different geographical areas and backgrounds as well. And then we'll have a second roundtable, and we'll give the floor to institution representatives and politicians. And the last part will be for Q&A with the audience. So to introduce our work, I have the great honor to call the 2 directors of the 3 scientific departments of Cirad, Mrs. Delphine Uquet, head of the biological system department, Mr. Eric Just, head of the performance of production systems and transformation systems in tropical areas department, and Mrs. Claire Cerdan, head of the society and environment department. Over to you. So, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to do this presentation so that's for the 3 of us. So we'll start the slides. The question that has been raised for today's attendance, for the panelists. Oh, I have to make this work. Hold on. Press the button. Just technical glitch. Just how is it working? I don't know how this works. So how to feed 10 billion inhabitants in a context of crisis that was previously described, and how can we feed and preserve the environment and the living and the environment that protects us and feeds us, and this environment we are fully involved in. So that's an interesting question to show that for today and tomorrow, it's no longer acceptable to approach food systems and their durability regardless of the sustainable farming production systems through agroecology, and regardless of the health system that have to adapt and interconnect human health, animal health, plant health, and the environment. So this is typically, with these 3 levers and through their interfaces, well, the Cirad is actually suggesting to establish its stance to contribute to the transformation of the system and to boost their synergy. I don't know how this is working. Oh, okay. Just having a bit of trouble with troubleshooting the technical issue. So the Cirad, that's the priority. Research is a priority and action is a priority through these three levers and interfaces. For today and tomorrow, we are convinced that we have the multidisciplinary know-how and participatory know-how through the levels and interfaces for long-term partnerships in the north and the south, with synergies between the north and the south, with a multi-stakeholders partnership that is necessary to meet the stakes that are embodied in the three levels. So it's a unique stakeholder for the research and the economic and agroecological system in the tropical context in the world. So it's not working. So we sweep through the main levers for actions that we will describe later on, and then I'll hand over to Eric. So we have to speed up agroecological transition to adapt rural changes to the climate and biodiversity. So it's a crucial shift for us. So on the left, you can see that the agroecological transition cannot be performed in the same way, depending on the type of farming and the type of areas. For some types of farming, you have to reduce the use of synthetic-based inputs, and for others, we'll have to increase the plant-based production. So that's a challenge for the farming that requires a lot of inputs, that where you have to reduce the number of inputs while maintaining high quality production. And for others, it's important to boost the production, especially for places where farmers suffer from hunger. As we heard this morning, they suffer from hunger in their own families. Second point important for us, we have to rethink the agronomy through a new agroecological engineering system to cooperate with the stakeholders to find solutions that are locally adaptable to the nature and that is fully suitable for the different sectors. We have to combine scientific knowledge, technological innovation, and know-how, and experts' know-how. In this regard, we have to model and study how these agrotropical systems work, forecast climate change on production and on the environment, and we have to analyze the processes and the systemic services that are produced. We have to emphasize biodiversity and agrodiversity. That's the key for agroecological transition. What plant biodiversity do we need to replace the inputs? And we have to develop technical solutions that are fully suitable, ethical and sustainable and economically viable, and that fully respect surrounding nature. Second point, a brief example in the world. We've been talking about Vietnam and Senegal, and here we wanted to show you an example with a new project funded by the EU as part of the Horizon Europe project. It's called CANAS. The canals, the goal is to jointly create a combination of farming practices for the subsistence to feed the local population on the development with cocoa, coffee, manioc, rice, and maize. And for other countries from Central Africa, Burundi, Cameroon, Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, we have 20,000 farmers work in living labs. So it's a multidisciplinary research and also transdisciplinary research, because we are actually working with and for the local stakeholders. So we want to assess the social and economic performance and produce more to improve food safety in Africa without deforestation and without any consequences on the environment and human health. Thank you, Eric. The second lever where we wish to promote more actions in the future as well as research is the lever for the integrated approach to health, or the One Health concept. The idea is to have this interconnected approach between human health, animal health, and plant and environment health. So it is a pioneer. We're a pioneer for the design of this concept. 40 years of research focused on the problematic of emerging diseases, zoonotic diseases, animal diseases, and so on. And in this regard, the Cirad is one of the co-designer of the PRESOD initiative, which goal is to study the biological, socio-environmental, and political factors of the emergence of zoonotic diseases. I mean, diseases that are transmitted from animal to man. In this context, the Cirad wants to strengthen its contribution to the design of biosurveillance networks as well as innovation with diagnosis tools and vaccines, and to have an impact between the meaning and decisions of Cirad will be a driving force that will be very important for the future. But it's not the only one, because the challenges of One Health go beyond the zoonotic diseases, and it's part also of the interfaces between farming and health in a very diversified way, like by addressing pollution, contamination, degradation of biodiversity and climate and food. And Cirad in the future wishes to reinforce action and research to better understand the impact of farming practices on health, how to foster synergy in agroecological transition and the One Health approach, and to make sure that biodiversity is an indicator as well as a lever for the health status of the ecosystem. Just one example about One Health that goes beyond the zoonotic diseases. It's the 100 Territories project. This project is still underway. It's funded by AFD and Europe. It's a multi-partner project coordinated by Cirad, and the goal is to assess how can integrated approaches to health be accelerators for agroecological transition in territories. There are 3 action sites: Senegal, Benin, and Cambodia and Laos. And as a whole, the idea is to combine the agroecology and One Health at the scale of the territory and to boost the benefits. That's it for this part. And I hand over to Claire. Last lever. Last lever I'd like to talk about. Cirad commits to transforming the food systems and non-food production systems. So it's an approach we decided to study through a systemic context, as you can see on the slide. It's the idea is to optimize and promote the value chains that are in a sustainable manner, and to contemplate some sort of coexistence between territories. The idea is to innovate for food quality and health quality in the products in order to give access to food to all the people. I mean, by this healthy food, quality food. The idea is to provide some support with the collaboration of the local food producers. We want to develop technical solutions or technologies that are fully suitable with the local context and its usage. And finally, the idea is to support the governance of these food systems and assess the impact of these transformations. That's a crucial approach here, because it allows us to better address sustainable transition of these food systems. Let me give you an example. I'd like to talk about the One Health approach, the connection with the food systems, and I will talk about the SWIM project in Gabon. The idea is to work on the sustainable wildlife management. First of all, the idea is to improve the preservation of wildlife in the forest and also guarantee food safety for the local people and preserve the ecosystems. There are 4 main points for the population. First, they're involved in the knowledge production at the local level, so they can create some wild game sectors, markets legally, something that's also sustainable and healthy. The idea is to find solutions or alternatives with them, alternatives to animal protein, in order to sort of relieve the ecosystems in which these people live. I'm talking mostly about the cities in Congo and the local forest pathways. This includes governance and management units that were jointly developed with the local stakeholders, and this enables us to better predict and better support the preservation of biodiversity as a whole. We can also preserve wildlife and also guarantee food and safe food to the people. So that's a clear example of this project. So it's really about the co-benefits that you have through an approach on health and food systems. Thank you very much for this introduction that allowed us to present the 3 main levers of the Cirad in order to meet this challenge. So you may get back to your seat. And now, for this first roundtable, I'd like to welcome three scientists, members of the scientific committee of the Cirad, Mr. Philippe Barret, three prominent scientists, Mr. Dao Tian, and Mrs. Florence Angaba-Fonte. Thank you. Thank you. During this first roundtable, together we'll review the levers that are science-based and that can help meet these challenges. So, Mr. Philippe Barret, you're an agronomist in tropical regions. You have a PhD in quantitative genetics, and you're a professor at the Catholic University of Louvain. You're mostly interested in the analysis of family farming systems and ecological transitions, genetics, and you're also the co-pilot of the intra-university certificate in agroecology and transitions, and you've been very involved in the role of agroecology as an alternative to sort of more traditional farming. So in your work, you cover all the challenges related to agroecology and the transition in the food systems. Can you tell us what are the main challenges that you need to address in order to sort of combine the three levers and achieve successful work to feed these billion of inhabitants? So thank you. It's not an easy question. Thank you for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I think that you've just said it, but it's important to bear this in mind. You know, the word alternative, I do believe that one of the points that we've seen many projects, we've heard a lot of keywords, but what you have to realize is that there are choices that need to be made, and they're not neutral. And I'd like to add one point to the conversation. There's this issue of choices on alternatives. There are many possible directions and trajectories for the food systems and farming systems, and they won't lead us to the same places. And with this in mind, we have to work. It's like the weather forecast today in Paris. We're facing headwinds. The sky is rather grey. So I don't want you to feel down, but I mean, I think if we have to make choices, there's a lot of work. We have a lot on our plate. It's not rocket science. And how can we achieve this? What can we learn from Cirad? And I think there are two key things that have happened over the last 40 years. And the Cirad has made a full commitment towards this. First of all, when you make these choices, first of all, you need to devise a roadmap and think about where you're heading to. And with INRAE, Cirad was a role model in 2008 through the Agreement initiative. And the goal was to say, okay, we're working with the partners, but do we really know what is the possible option and a possible guidance for the food and farming systems at the world level? And that was quite ambitious because the Cirad and INRAE committed to work on a project, and they realized that by addressing and thinking of a trajectory for farming systems, if we had to review our food practices. And for the first time, we were able to say that you cannot actually rethink farming without completely rethinking or reshuffling the food practices. If you do not rethink or reshuffle food practices, you cannot guarantee that you meet this specific challenge. And that's the main difference with 40 years ago. 40 years ago, agronomists were asked to feed the planet.
Et on ne disait pas.
And we were not saying we are going to change the rules of the game for feeding ourselves. We need to do this in a given equation where you need to supply food to people. That's over. We're no longer in this production system approach. We're in a logic of food systems when both need to be thought of with a diversity of players and inputs, but by integrating the consumers to the farmers, where and whatever lies between the two, that is the various industry players who have a crucial role, because they are the ones today who determine the articulation between the two ends of the chain. It's not the farmer alone or the consumer alone that can come up with a solution. It's impossible. So the second thing that Cirad did was to fuel a new innovation paradigm, which is called the agroecological paradigm. Agroecology is to rethink the way we innovate. And most importantly, it's based on principles. Agroecology is not the best solutions. It's not the best techniques. Agroecology is to think differently about the solutions, to think the solution at or from different levels or scales, from a participatory standpoint, and integrated both the production challenges and the biodiversity, climate change, and other considerations to maintain the production conditions at the end of the day. And it's also about thinking beyond the border between the natural system and the cultivated systems. Therefore, it's huge. Agroecology is a huge scope and field in terms of thinking innovation, and I don't think we'll get there overnight. The emergency first is not to go with haste. The first thing about this emergency is to repeat the legitimacy of agroecology. That is one of the key options. And I'm not here to say to preach for agroecology. It's one of the options that must be on the agenda within the limits of its capacity, because the second thing we need to be aware of is we need to develop the capacities of agroecology. Cirad is 40 years old. Agroecology is not 40 years old. We could talk about this, but for me, agroecology is, say, 20 years old at most, and still needs to develop a new capacity and needs investment for this. Cirad paved the way, and what I hope is that this commitment by Cirad will be pushed even further so that they maintain their course against the current headwinds. Thank you for all this innovation capacity and to innovate change of paradigms. Mr. Dalton, you're the Vice President of the Vietnam Academy of Agricultural Sciences. You've already worked on these themes for 30 years, the agroecology, family farming, the governance of the industries, etc. Could you tell us more about the way you have succeeded in Vietnam in terms of bringing together all of these drivers? In fact, for Vietnam, we recently changed the strategy. You know that Vietnam is a rice exporter, well known in the world. We're number 15 in terms of agricultural exports, with a very strong input of family farming. Now, can we continue to develop along the same lines and feed more people? It's difficult to say because it takes lots of tilling. It calls on a number of resources. Biodiversity will take the toll, and water as well. But we can't just improve the yield. We cannot continue to along the same line with exports at that level. Secondly, we see a disconnect also, like Philip underlined, between production and consumption, and that's a great danger. Even in those regions like the Mekong Delta or the central level, we export a lot of coffee. Malnutrition is at the highest. So it's not because you produce more somewhere that you have solved the nutritional question there as well. So we decided to adopt new strategies. For us, in fact, The Cirad's approach, this food system approach is very relevant. So it's a multi-position approach with a new approach about new diets, sustainable diets for the populations also. So it's really One Health also is part of this picture. But we do need a multifaceted approach. So in Vietnam, we're currently working on this in terms of changing the food systems with the contribution of Cirad. I would like to insist on the Cirad's input in this research, because Cirad already worked for over 30 years in Vietnam. So 40 years of existence, 30 years in Vietnam, and did a lot of research on the farming methods in different topologies, like in the mountains, etc., to give evidence as to what was working or not. With this agroecology approach, so we need to have research like this to nurture or educate the political decisions. And so we're testing with an APA project in Vietnam, and we'd be happy to perhaps some coverage in the Le Monde Journal. But our challenge is based on the research of results and the findings of research to see in actual term we can develop at regional level and then at national level. And there is a very strong demand from the political world that researchers, including those of Cirad and Vietnamese partners, to answer these questions. Thank you, David Han. Perhaps we can get back to you later on about the mechanisms used in Vietnam. Perhaps, Mrs. Agaba-Fontaine, you're a professor in the food science and nutrition, deputy dean for the cooperation and University of Cameroon. You're a member of the scientific committee of Cirad and the scientific secretary of the committee of CORAF, West and Central Africa for Agricultural Development Committee. You worked on the substitution of synthetic substances by natural products for the production and conservation of food products. Perhaps you could tell us more about the way you integrate or build in the One Health approaches and the nutritional aspects to address this challenge that we are all faced with. Thank you for giving me the floor. Good evening to all the participants to this meeting. I would like to join with my colleagues to congratulate Cirad for its actions in countries of the third world, in particular in Cameroon, where I live. For the 40 years of Cirad's existence, we have conducted many research projects in terms of increasing the production, the quantity, but we now realize that over the last 10 years, Cirad started to explore not only the notion of quantity, but also the quality of agricultural products. Talking about levers, drivers, how to improve both quantity and quality of agricultural products throughout the whole value chain, I would like to say that all the concepts we are debating here, whether it be agroecology, One Health, or polycrisis, it's a nexus where all these aspects interact to concur to they're all involved in the quality and quantity of of agricultural product. If you take we do research in my team at the University of Bamenda in Canberra. When we talk about One Health, we are trying to demonstrate by a number of tests that instead of using chemical products to promote growth of food products, you can use natural extracts, plants, spices, etc., that also have very active compounds. If they are concentrated, they can be efficient in replacing the chemical agents that are being used in these industries to promote the growth of whether it be plants or antibiotics that are used to improve the growth of animals, of cattle. In my country, quite frequently we see that in the cattle breeding sector, they use antibiotics not only to combat the diseases of animals, but they use it to boost growth, even if the animal is not ill, just to boost their growth. And they do not quite play by the rules of antibiotic use. I think it's even forbidden now to use antibiotics as a growth agent. I think it is worldwide. The reason is that on the long term, it's the healthcare of the consumers that will be impacted directly or not directly. Whether it be cancer or other diseases are being boosted by these excessive use of antibiotics. And these practices at the farm level are very important. If you take the example, as I said, there's a connection between agroecology, One Health, etc. I have a friend working on the use of biofertilizers to grow certain plants like manioc, and they realized that even using the peels of the plants, you can extract very effective agents that you can use even to conserve or fertilize the soil instead of buying chemical products that will, on the contrary, deteriorate the quality of the soil. So that's already agroecology. And part of these extracts can be used to, it's antibacterial also, and even can be used for cereal. So that's why I wanted to say that there's a great level of interaction between agroecology, One Health, and the other aspects of the picture. So basically, this is what we're trying to do at our university. And again, I would like to commend Cirad, because the colleague I mentioned that did this work on this biofertilizers, his work was funded by Cirad. The problem, however, is that the results are not known. The findings of the research are not communicated, are not mainstreamed, and that's another challenge. Perhaps Cirad and other bodies can see how to better how to make the most out of this research to see how we can address the future challenges. Indeed, thank you. You showed us the importance of knowledge. Perhaps I'd like to take up this point, Mr. Philip Barry, to ask you about the One Health approach, the food transformation, food system transformation. It's a science of complexity, all this. So how do you see this science of complexity? What new agenda for research, and how can we work to intensify the knowledge that is needed to achieve these ambitions? Quite a vast question indeed. And complexity tends to be scary, but in fact, it's just a matter of acknowledging the fact that the world is complex, and that's something we tend to oversee in the 20th century, because the agriculture in the 20th century were very simplistic, very single aspect. So the complexification of the question is only it's only back to reality. It's not for for fun that we're getting involved in complexity. But for this, we need, as scientists, researchers, need to be trained, and Cirad has placed in its agenda a stronger effort for training. And we need to develop our knowledge, and do so in a more overarching level, exploring social sciences as well as participatory approaches, embarking systems. Systems is a study of interactions. We've studied so far the objects, not the interactions between the objects. So this is something we need to approach. And something else. We're here at the journal Le Monde, and I'm a loyal reader of Le Monde since I was a teenager, so it's a bit emotional for me to be here. I still have at home the issue announcing the death of Jean-Paul Sartre, just to show you how old I am. But something essential and new, perhaps, is the question of the narrative. Faced with this complexity, we not only have a competition of proposals, technical options, trajectories, but we also have competitive between different narratives. That is, construct of imagination, of motivation that are carried not only because we hear about the interface with the political world, but the politicians are also interfacing and interacting with society. Society is flooded with narratives that are very often conflicting with one another. And this was highlighted in the introduction earlier. And sometimes these narratives are in contradiction with facts. Therefore, I think agroecology, One Health, and sustainable agro-food systems is also a matter of developing a consistent narrative with a consistent and relevant trajectory. And scientists sometimes are a bit at a loss in this area, and that's perhaps something we need to invest in, to develop narratives, because science is not only about solutions, it's also about the trajectory. And we need to be clear about this and not be afraid to be in conflict. And so I think, and I said it earlier, that there are choices to be put down, and they're not neutral nor simple. And perhaps we must say we can have 2 or 3 options, and with the corresponding narratives, and choose what to embark on for. And that's perhaps what you need to do to continue the work of Cirad for the last 40 years. And Mr. Tata, how this construct of a narrative, which is essential, it seems, how will it nurture the discussions around the policy on agriculture, cattle breeding, and health more globally? What are the mechanisms in place today for this, and how do you approach this with all of the players to nurture this public policy dialogue? Well, indeed, these three drivers proposed by Cirad, it's a systemic approach that we need. For research, we need all to establish these research groups, cross-disciplinary groups. As I said earlier, we must also there's whatever happens between production and consumption. We've set up research groups to work in the field with nutritionists and agronomists and economists, etc. In Vietnam, and this with the support of Cirad, with a mechanism that we've implemented for participatory research across various disciplines. And this has been very positive, because to dialogue with the national level, we have a mechanism to make it possible to cooperate between the various ministries like agriculture, Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Commerce for the sourcing of food products, for instance, or raw materials, and the Ministry of Environment. So we have supported this collaborative approach even at ministerial level. And with Cirad, we've worked on a nationwide plan to transform the food system, and this has made it possible with the government, to establish a mechanism called Partnership for Food System. And once we have this, we have 5 task forces, working groups. The first one is on agroecology, then sustainable consumption, reduction of waste, and all other general policies. So for the Cirad and the French institutions have taken part in this, and the government recognizes that in this very complex system that we live in today, we need to know the output from the scientific research, and having a nationwide framework allows us having a discussion on an ongoing basis between the world of research and the world of ministries. And it also facilitates the political dialogue, which is quite important. Also, we get recommendations from the political institutions once we've decided on a certain approach for the sustainable food systems. We need to have it embraced at the local level once it's been decided upon at the governmental level. Agroecology will not be the same from one region to another. So there's not one single way to mainstream this. You need to respect, even in Vietnam, every province will have different needs from this point of view. Thank you. So a multidisciplinary research and need to be able to dialogue with the political decision makers and different scales. Perhaps Mrs. Fonte, before we move on to the next roundtable, could you tell us about how in Cameroon you have developed some consensuses between these various groups and challenges, and how that can be fed into the national and regional policies? Thank you for this question. It's true. It's something we have to deal with in our research at our university to leverage the results of research, because I think when you start working on a research project, you don't involve all the players right from the start. I think this is something we need to address right from the start, from the inception, right from the conception. We need to involve all the players in the chain, including the farmers, the community, and all the way up to the government. We need to involve them right from the start so they can embrace the project, and each can thus play their role all the way to the completion of the project. And the other thing I'd say is that looking back on what we've done and what we've got in our power plants, I think it's important to communicate on these results and to make them easily understandable so that the result can be shared by a greatest number of people, the greatest number, and perhaps look for ambassadors that can carry our message and our voice, our vision, who can, for instance, talk to politicians, to governors, and advocate for what we are currently coming up with. Also, to advertise our results, to publicize our results, perhaps we would need to create some innovation markets where we invite various players, people who come with their innovations, they exchange between themselves, they discuss what they've got. And when you read a document on paper, it's different from what you get in terms of interaction when you have people in flesh talking about their projects, innovations, and so on. So promoting some kind of fairs or conventions. So the importance of involving all the players to try and upscale innovations by disseminating science at all levels. Thank you, all three of you, for joining in on this first roundtable. So we will, without further ado, move on to the second roundtable. We are limited by time constraints. We'll call for Mr. Ibrahim Mayaki, Mr. Dominique Potier, and Mrs. Anna Dottir. Good afternoon to all three of you. Welcome to the second roundtable. We heard scientists talking about these levers. We're now moving on to your standpoint as public or political institutions representing the citizens and also members of international organizations. Perhaps to start with Mr. Mayaki, you are the former Prime Minister of Niger, also head of the Development Agency for the African Union, EPAD, and you are now acting as you're in charge of food systems. So perhaps you could tell us your views about the importance of research on the development of public policies, whether at national levels or at the level of the African Union. So in a nutshell, well, first of all, it's a great honor for me to be here, and I would like to congratulate Cirad. I know we don't have much time, so I'll be short. 3 points are in a nutshell. Research, quite obviously, is essential, and all the more so since, and if you refer to the 40 years of existence of Cirad, and if you assess the impact it has had in terms of transformation at local level, it is considerable. And the fundamental question behind all this is how can research interact with the policymakers who define public policies. And I think here there's a form of delay in the understanding of reality between the policymakers and the dynamic of research. And this delay must be made up for. There's a disconnect between the two. For instance, we are currently talking about how to feed 10 billion inhabitants. This might for Africa, it will be how to feed 2.5 billion inhabitants by 2050. And there are some avenues of research and analysis which the policymakers are not informed about, because the space for interaction has not been prepared for this. So that's a fundamental point. The first fundamental point is we need to work on this space of consultation, of interaction, but this is also submitted or subjected to the lack of adaptation of our public institutions to the multi-sectoriality of, we see that research is increasingly multi-sectorial, multi-themed, and we still have ministries that are specialized for environment, healthcare, agriculture, whatever the interministerial committee you set up, it will not address the need for synergy. So the adaptation of our institutions to multi-sectoriality is another challenge that we are faced with today, and policy makers in particular, they need to face up to this to better leverage the results of research. These are the 2 points essentially I wanted to raise okay, or perhaps one more thing. The third point, because I did have a third point in mind, which I strongly believe in. We're talking about governance. There is something that relates famine and the type of political regime in place. And Mathias says in authoritarian regimes there are more. It is more likely that famine will develop than in a democratic system. What does that mean, a democratic system? That in a system where all the players are active, take participants in the definition of public policies, not a top-down movement, but a top-down and bottom-up movement to define public policies. And in the scientific theme we are talking about, it means also respecting producers. And in the case of Africa, it's clear the producers produce 80% of what we consume, and they are not sufficiently supported by our government. It is improving, but it should be more so. So the third point is this theme of to speed up whatever the practices that we are going to use, whatever the results of the research we will undertake to feed 10 billion people. We need to speed up and speed up in the right direction. And this takes us back to the question of the narrative that was raised earlier.
The narrative that was emphasized earlier on. Behind every narrative, there is a strategy, and the strategy should be acceleration. There will be mistakes, but this acceleration is about accelerated learning. Thank you. Thank you. Multi-sectorial approach, as adaptation of the institutions, involvement of the stakeholders in definition of public policies, and for strong acceleration. Mr. Potier, you're a member of parliament for the Meurthe-et-Moselle region. You're a member of the Commission of Economic Affairs, an ombudsman for French government on the duty of vigilance. So I'll hand over to you, and can you explain how you've included all these challenges in the work that you've undertaken within the parliament, and what is the role of research to help the institutions and nurture these national and strategies and policies. I don't have much time ahead, so I'm very happy. Happy birthday, long life to Cirad and all your missions. Thank you, Ibrahim. You said something very important. It's the issue about let's not believe what we see. We see things, but we do not believe it to the point that we could induce systemic conversions or personal conversion or professional shifts. So that's in the sort of halfway through an intermediate moment. We don't really believe what we see. I've been involved in politics. I used to be involved in politics as a local elected representative, as a farmer, and I will be in politics still after 27 in a different way through associations or as a volunteer. Politics is just a part of service. How can we serve our nation? And it's about devising the law. It's about reasserting a public power and trying to regulate the the spirit of enterprise. So in the 20th century, about 21st century, we're faced with an outstanding challenge as part of the Universal Declaration of 1948. It's about the reassertion of the dignity of the human being, and it's about protecting our shared house. The idea is to save everybody, to save the two of them, the dignity of the human being, farmers from all over the world. Cirad not only works for a corporation or a country, it works for humanity as a whole. And Cirad does this to protect the ecosystems, which are a prerequisite for productivity. This triangle approach has to be advocated, especially if you are supporting the productiveness of tomorrow and the millions of inhabitants. We have to defend our ecosystems. If this slips through the net, it's not going to work, or we will destroy our ability to produce. I'm very keen on our ability to produce, and I'm very assertive. There are three levers that look relevant to me regarding today's topic. It's the very issue of the land, the ground, the issue of trade, the right trade, and the issue of science within democracy and the public power of science. There are many topics about the land. You have to read Le Grand Pisali. He had no hair, but Pisali said in the second part or third part of his work, he said, we'll need all the lands and all the farmers of the world to feed the entire world. So that's what the Cirad is saying in a different way through ecological approach. We need all farmers and all the lands from the world, the regulation of the land, decisions regarding carbon compensation, energy compensation, challenges and risk of destruction of the land. This is going to be a major challenge in the light of climate change. And this reminds me of Pierre Opian, geopolitician, about the issue of the link and long time around Earth, sharing the Earth, democratic regime, and social prosperity. So these are fundamentals that are ubiquitous. We are faced with massive deregulations, even with highly regulated countries like France and Europe. And there's no political or union-based interaction in this deregulation process. And that's a strong signal that we notice as part of the international cooperation. How can we accept the standard applied, the currently applied standards? How can we transmit the all the richness of the cadastral registry and support the land? And France has to act about the issue of trade. I'd like to draw your attention on the fact that questioning the European Spring with the CS3D directive on the duty of vigilance that I supported in France in 2017 and became a European directive, it's been highly questioned by some political powers in place and civil society. The CSRD directive offered a perspective for a new approach in the company from a farming point of view on the CSR, and which as a performance indicator for companies, financial markets and human resources and prerequisites for trade. These are signs of concerns of this European Spring that could be called a European Spring if we did not preserve these differentiating factors towards our US competitors and Asian competitors. And then the issue of science. I'd like to tell Cynthia Flory, it is the citizen who has a critical mind. And through science, you exercise a critical mind. It's part of the rule of law, and rule of law preserves the critical mind. We have this critical mind everywhere where science is questioned and its ability to serve the common good. Our democracy itself, by its own essence, is endangered. So it's about the cycle of democracy and development with science as an interface, and we have to protect this science at the international scale as part of the multilateralism. It's been able to create the One Health approach because WHO worked with FAO and NOMSA, how do you call it? ONSA, which used to be the ILO. So it's WOHA. So it's about it took place about a decade ago, and hasn't been completely fulfilled, and it hasn't been translated. In reality, at the international level, we struggle to implement it in the nations, and it may be seriously threatened by multilateralism. And multilateralism, at the same time, produced something wonderful through the planning exercise performed by Antoine Peillon. It's the Agri-Monde exercise. How can we travel? How can we eat and move and get heating everywhere on the planet in a dignified way? So, taking these perspectives for planning to include, to cover the planet limits for food, and all these aspects are not accounted for. They're not accounted for in the political perspectives. It could be like in the narrative of innovative sobriety and quality-based growth that gives a lot of room to development and new initiatives and flourishment. But it's not even included in the political decisions that we make and lead. So this science threatened by multilateralism produces national knowledge and universal knowledge, and it produces universal knowledge while combining science, biology, agronomy, and we're combining this with the science of the living and human sciences throughout their full dimensions through low and socioeconomic factors. I am a strong advocate of Europe, and I'd like to finish by saying that Europe is reaching a shift at the border of the Ukraine and Crimea and other regions. It is going through some sort of difficult times. It's being built on the European ethos, a certain idea of the universal approach and cooperation, and it's entering into the competition of empires. And I think we're bound to lose this competition. So we have to be European for two entities when you're a French citizen. And based on on the idea of a science to serve common good with a universal dimension. We should think of our values, of our founding values, and use them as tools for peace in the world. Because if we are only copycats of the competitors, we will lose the battle and we will lose our souls. And I'm pleading for Europe to regain the pride to support a specific vision of fairness through a universal approach. And the scientists of Cirad at ARE and elsewhere are all people who contribute to justice and fair world, and they're all humanists. Thank you, Mr. Bautier. Mrs. Arnautir, you were the Minister of Industry and Trade in Iceland from 2013 to 2017, and Member of Parliament from the 2007-2016. You're the head of the Development Center of OECD. How is OECD approaching these challenges? What are the main levers? And what is the role of research in order to meet these specific challenges?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
To switch to English, just in honor of the wonderful translators that I have to I'm so glad. I've been looking over the room and I see that I'm the only one using translation, so we're two now. But thank you so much for inviting me and to have the views of the Development Center and the OECD at this table. And I think it has been extremely interesting for me to listen to the scientists and the science aspect of a policy challenge and issue that we have on our table every day. So it's I think it was Madame Fonte who said involve all the players in the game, and I want to thank Cirad for doing that, to involve a broad range of stakeholders and partners in this dialogue here today, because I think that is of utmost importance. The world is complex. We don't have to go into that. Multidimensional issues and challenges require multidimensional solutions. And to answer the question, how do you feed 10 million people, or can we feed 10 million people in the year 2050? Well, we have to. That's the first answer to the question. And then we also have to, and that has been discussed here today from the scientific point of view, to identify the main challenges. And I would say that those are three. The three main challenges: one regarding the food production, one regarding the access to food, and the third challenge would be involved with climate change and all the ramification from that. And if we start with the food production, we can just see that the way we are going about it, it's environmentally unsustainable. And then I'm talking about the growth in agricultural production. And population, income growth, they have led to increased consumption, production, causing a lot of challenges and intensive and excessive use of land that has negative environmental consequences, as we have been talking about here today, with deforestation and other ramifications. Second challenge that I mentioned is the access to food, and ensuring that everyone, regardless of income, where they live, etc., that they have access to nutritious and affordable food. And if we look at the statistics, we love statistics at the OECD. Many households, especially in the vulnerable regions, they just cannot afford healthy food, and it's a troubling fact that unhealthy food is sometimes more affordable than healthy food, but that's another debate. But the FAO estimates that about 2.8 billion people, more than one third of the global population, cannot afford a healthy diet. So that's challenge number 2. Third challenge, as I mentioned, the climate change. And with rising temperatures and extreme weathers disrupting the food production, and there again, the farmers in the most vulnerable areas are struggling to cope. And another statistic, according to the IPCC, by 2050, cereal prices could rise by 29%, which would not only impact consumers there, but also globally through higher prices, and again, the most vulnerable households and low income, they are the most affected. So these are huge challenges, but how can we address them? And now, of course, I'm coming from the policymaking side of this discussion. First of all, we need policies that ensure that food production is environmentally sustainable and economically fair. Farmers must be able to earn a decent income, and again, the consumers must have access to affordable and healthy food. And their smallholders, the small farmers, they play a crucial role. And globally, there are about 600 million smallholder farmers, each working maybe 2 hectares of land or even less. But together, they are estimated to produce about 30% of the world's food supply. And one of the policy areas where we could speed up on is to address the low earnings of these farmers and local food producers by ensuring a fairer price for the producers, protecting them from unfair competition. You mentioned trade. There are policy areas where these issues can be addressed, and also on the sort of consumer side, to reward the price premium for organic and agroecologically grown products, so that from the supplies or the demand side, we have also growing population, urbanization, rising incomes of the middle class, also in the developing countries. Those are driving up demand, and that is an opportunity then for these small farmers to develop or for countries to develop the domestic and regional agri-food industry. We every year at the Development Center of the OECD, we publish a report on each of our regions that we cover, and our 2021 Africa Development Dynamics report, which we co-produced with the African Union Commission. We saw that 11 African countries by 2030, if we can meet the increasing food demand locally by supporting these farmers locally and have the capacity building locally, 20 million additional jobs could be created in the agri-food sector, and now we're talking about these 11 countries, including 8 million in food processing and services, and would mean a 20% increase from 2019, and we're talking about doing this in 11 years until 2030. So we must invest more in local infrastructure, local capacity building, local marketing, and by doing that, we could provide the resilience and the national food supply and national food security. And then finally, it's also about how we present this industry to the young people. We have to make the food producing industry more attractive. And that means, again, focusing on the capacity building. That means, again, focusing on transforming the industry more technical. Our newest Africa Development Dynamics is on education and skills, and that's also the theme from the Africa Union Commission, or the African Union Year of of Education this year, this is how we can create interest and drive and innovation into this sector to help drive it along. And you asked about the need for research. As I said, I've been throwing numbers out during my intervention, and yes, research and science is the key to any progress in this area. Just as in any other, we can build better policies with evidence-based research. And so I think I will leave it at that and just emphasize the importance of research.
Thank you very much. Merci pour votre intervention.
Thank you for your contribution. Production, agroecological intensification, creating jobs, prices, attractiveness for young people, and research plays a crucial role. You've just said it. Thank you very much to you three for this roundtable. Unfortunately, we have to conclude. We have to wrap up. Unfortunately, we cannot move on with a third series of questions, but I strongly invite you to stay for those who can, because there'll be a series of questions and answers with the audience. And I'd like to invite our three participants from the previous roundtable to join us on stage for just a few minutes of Q&A with the room, with the audience. Raise your hand. There are microphones available for you. I strongly encourage you to use a microphone. Mr. Potier will have to leave soon. So if you have questions for Mr. Potier, we may start with Mr. Potier because he has to leave soon, as much as you can, I mean. So shall I start? So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Philippe Auguin from INRA. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm taking the opportunity to give my full support to my colleagues of Cirad and wish you a happy anniversary. There are so many interesting things that I've heard throughout the two roundtables. I'd like to make the link between the question of the narrative, the question of massification as well, and how can we stop opposing farming emergency, ecological emergency in the north and southern countries. And you, Dominic, with your experience and through your vision as a humanist and through your very ambitious vision, maybe we could have a sort of a rebound to convince all stakeholders with a participatory approach that goes well beyond the regulation scope. The idea, first of all, is to preserve the farming of tomorrow, the grounds, the lands, the heritage of the farmers by combining ecological and farming emergency. How can we use science and, this help us move forward? Thank you, Philip. I'm very happy to answer your question. I just had a few things to say. I haven't mentioned them yet. We need a narrative that is both about enrichment. We're not going to save nature and the planet. That's not enough, obviously. We see the growing populism. We need to be deep-rooted. We need to assert our attachment to the farming system, to the food producers, to the stakes of food. We have to be deeply rooted to this. It's very dear to us. And this strong enrichment has to connect us with the universal scope. It's very important. So we pay a lot of respect to all these producers in Nigeria and Brazil and Thailand. So we have to regain this dimension, to have a shift between from the territory to the planet, so that each territory fully plays its role in this planet level narrative. It reminds me of a famous technician and engineer in food processing with a specific approach to planets. I'm talking about Pisanier. Maybe we should read through Pisanier again. I'm not trying to manipulate you, but I think that we can't afford to stop the funds for public aid to development because there are peace factors. These funds show forms of solidarity and human brotherhood and sisterhood in France through its farming traditions, rural code, and veterinary flair. France has a message to transmit, a message to spread all over the world, and we spread the message through means and laboratories and experiences. So I'm talking about innovation. So we have to advocate this APD, provided we have the right policies through national unity, and we need national unity to avoid the worst to come. And to right here, right now, so I can see people from the fair trade industry here. The fair trade should not be a niche market. It should be a standard as a reference for the trade of tomorrow. This is where we have the shift. There's organic or fair trade. No, it's all about the agroecology, and fair trade is the reference in this, and the rest is just not normal. The standard and the norm is fair trade and organic. I guess you've clearly understood my political message. Is when you fight against Mercosur, you are a strong advocate of the Green Deal. Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, André Jean Guérin from the Academy of Agriculture and Farming. Thank you for these very interesting discussions. So, Mrs. Saint-Martin de Saint-Martin reminded us at the start of the meeting that there was almost 1 billion individuals who are still suffering from hunger, although there is enough farming production to feed them. There may be 10 billion people tomorrow, and Agrimont just telling us there will be enough production to feed them. So the question that I'm asking myself is, does it fall within the scope of Cirad to review and suggest the prerequisites for enough production to actually cover all individuals so that everybody can be fed, and that the potential capital gains could be redistributed in a fair manner, so that is within the organizations in the States or through the international relations. This could be for the improvement of the regulation systems in time and space, storage, transport and distribution, or this could be used for more sort of institutional systems. Thank you. It's a very good question. I think that you have to make a difference between technical solutions and, say, political solutions. Technically speaking, I believe that we all know that it's actually possible to feed. We can do it technically. Technically speaking, we know how to feed these people, but the question is, the applicable technical solutions, do they cater for this? Can we achieve this with them? So we are shifting from rationality of the technical solutions to another field that is about political solutions that are usually governed by interest. And the definition of public policies at national, regional, or global level is not subject to the same rational approach as in technical solutions, if you see what I mean. This is where we have the issue. Remember, we were talking about trade earlier on, and the rules of international trade are changing rapidly, more and more through protectionism. Protectionism, unfortunately, is gaining grounds. The consequences of these rules are still, this change in the rules are getting unknown. And if this continues this way, we don't know what will be the consequences. So there's this very global context. The food systems have become some sort of a political weapon, and the rules of international trade are considerably changing. And despite all the scientific data that we have, this spirit is not really infused in this already weak multilateral system. And institutions like Cirad are absolutely key in this system because they can all cater for better things. They can sort of illustrate the irrational aspect. And if they manage to do this, if they manage to disseminate this among a series of stakeholders, then they're in the right position to change all conditions and to change the terms. And this reminds me of this fundamental question. We need to have systematic public dissemination of science data, scientific data and research, so that other stakeholders can fully embrace it, and then they will influence and have an impact on the definition of public policies. Mr. Barry? I'd like to add something. I fully agree. But if you see it the other way around, I think that we should also disseminate policies within the communities of researchers in Cirad. And I think what really matters, while remaining very stringent and rigorous and remaining neutral and keeping our objectives in mind, it's important that all researchers at Cirad show interest in these texts. I'm not asking them to become policy experts, but there should be a commitment to say, oh, we relate to this, we are concerned with this. But people are rather prudish at the Cirad. I'm very positive when I say this. And they're like, oh, maybe it's not our role, maybe we are not in the right position to have our say on this. I'm not about to discuss their modesty here, but I think the least you can do is to show some interest in this, to try to participate, to be part of that cultural contamination, if I could say so, to be part of it also internally. You should not be afraid of controversy. We may not all agree on everything, but we may run the risk of embracing controversy instead of, remaining in your comfort zone through a scientific neutrality. As long as you don't disrupt objectivity and rigor, it's fine. As long as you're consistent and coherent regarding these texts, we have to be aligned. And if policies have to be rationally aligned, we have to be aligned with the expectation of society and political issues. I think it's a twofold movement towards the policies, and it's about the policies within institutions. Cirad has a role to play as an institution, of course. There's the role of the community of Cirad as a full and broad community, a full participant, a planet-based community. I'd just like to add, based on the Vietnamese experience, in Vietnam, we have very few farmlands compared to Africa, and I had the opportunity to travel to Africa. But in Vietnam, we can export. We are good at exporting. We can keep exporting. There's no problem with exportation. About the technical aspect, if we have a good policy, it works. I think that the role of the Cirad is about facilitating cooperations between the North and the South, exchanging about political experiences. For instance, in the aftermath of COVID, we received a lot of African individuals. They came to Vietnam not to learn the techniques, but they came to Vietnam to find out how policies could actually support family farming. Thank you very much for your contributions. And the answer to this question there's a real connection between the two roundtables. Thank you very much. So now we'll move on to the last sequence of today's session. Thank you, Sandra. So you were a very good timekeeper. So we are reaching the conclusion. I'm inviting the Deputy General Director of AFD to come to the floor, Mr. Wagner. No jingle?
Il n'y en a pas.
Voilà, il devait y avoir un jingle, mais
oui, non.
There should have been a jingle, but there's no jingle. But still, I'm taking the initiative to speak right away. I noted a lot of different aspects, different things. And on the 15th of April 1980, when Mr. Cirad died, So then you can find out whether you were before or after, and then it can help you sort of work out the age of Mr. Barrett. I won't say more. So my dear Elizabeth, dear Prime Minister, dear Dominic, who had to leave, and dear Philip, I'm very happy to be standing in front of you today to see some of my colleagues of AFD who moved to other institutions. IRD is well represented here in this room. And I had the opportunity to say it earlier on when we signed the partnership agreement between AFD and Cirad, and I'm saying it again before you. It's a great pleasure for me to see my AFD counterparts in the room and my colleagues and friends from the Cirad, Expertise France, Proparco, they're here as well. To celebrate the 40th anniversary of Cirad and for the signature of partnership agreement. There was the opportunity to celebrate the 40th marriage anniversary between AFD and Cirad, so the emerald marriage, emerald wedding. So that's a nice color, emerald, 40 years. So that greatly embodies our agroecological ambition. So many interesting things were said, and I've listed quite a few of them, and they're really at the heart of the projects of AFD and Cirad. The first one is about the issue of the question of the narrative, and I would have phrased it differently, but it's interesting. It may sound rather anecdotal when you're a banker or researcher in your daily life, if you're involved in financial techniques or cultivation techniques, but the very question of the narrative is a challenge, and the Member of Parliament, Potier, was very clear about the ambition for the collective narrative and the planet-wide ambition to really explain the shared ambition of 10 billion individuals who have to find a solution to feed. And that's the first ambition that we have all in this room. And thank you for supporting and encouraging the researchers at the Cirad, and maybe INRAE, I don't know, and obviously all the teams at AFD to encourage us to embrace this and explain what they do on social networks without questioning the objectiveness of their work. And they work in very rigorous conditions. So that's the first part of the narrative that is absolutely strategic. The second aspect in the narrative, the third aspect, sorry, in the narrative. I'll talk about the second one later. When I joined AFD, and my colleagues and I laughed a lot about this, but when I joined AFD, I found out that, Mr. Prime Minister, in your country, we were funding the installation of sort of stone-based links. These are like small walls of stone walls that you build in the fields to fight against the erosion effect. So it creates a sort of a dike to retain the water, like a dam. So why am I saying this? Because the development jargon that we use between ourselves and our community, sometimes we have to sort of leave it aside in order to tell stories and explain what we do. And this echoes to what the Member of Parliament said. It's a way to show the results and convince people that what we are doing through the development policy, regardless of the instrument AFD or Cirad or IRD or INRAE, and their commitment in Africa. So the instruments that we use produce results, and it's worth it for governments and political institutions. It's worth investing in this via the development policies and the budget credits that are allocated. These resources are all supporting this policy. And the halfway narrative in the middle, it's the link between all the projects that we fund. And it's about this universal ambition that drives us today and that leads us to meet today and how to feed 10 billion individuals on Earth. It's not an easy narrative to articulate and unfold. And Mr. Professor, you said it's about having an approach that can help convince farmers to switch and to contemplate a switch in their farming practices. And this afternoon, I was talking about a project that we've had with the Cirad in the Dominican Republic with the farmers and cocoa producers in Dominican Republic. They worked on four farming techniques based on the age of the cocoa plants, the age of the land, and on the technique used. They were able to measure the productivity of those cultivation techniques, the decreasing use of fertilizers and chemical intrants, and at the end, of course, the expected income for farmers. And this can only work if you are able to convince people by showing them results with your local partners. And through this, you can achieve a switch for the better. So it's what the community does, and it's about this capacity to convince. Obviously, involves a narrative that has to be adapted to a given territory, and it has to be clearly fine-tuned to combine the results of research, techno-cultural aspects, and the ability to convince and reassure people on the fact that there will be enough food at the end of the year and sufficient yields and money to meet both ends. That's very important. The second topic that was widely addressed, towards which we've been committed for many years, it's what I call territorial planning. Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned the democratic density and territorial planification, and these two topics are strongly connected. And we see a strong interest in giving communities the opportunities to reappropriate their own territory and think and realize in how this territory will look like in 10 years' time, and achieve then consensus on how to develop this territory through its economic aspects, but also the biodiversity and the entire territory. It's a very complex topic. Mr. Professor, you were saying about you had to add more complexity to today's farming and taking into account all the various interactions between the various fields, breaking the silos between institutions. The only interministerial transversality may not suffice to avoid obsession with farming only. Basically, there are forms of participatory democracies that have to be implemented and contemplated at national and international level. And to finish, I'd like to talk about geographical indications for a land, soil, or specific techniques to produce cheese or wine or other products. So they have to meet some clear specifications and requirements. They have to create an agreement for the specifications and requirements. And it's a strong tool to advocate family farming. And it was said numerous times in the session. I think that in Cameroon, I think the high Punjab pepper has a geographical indication. In Vietnam, I don't know. I think we've worked with the Vietnamese farming authorities. If it's not the case, we'll start tomorrow. We'll start working with you and offer to work with you on the creation of geographical indications, because there are so many positive outcomes with this. As a project for a territory, and the geographical indication, that's the weapon of the smaller ones to fight against the large merchant companies and international groups. Finally, the third instrument I wanted to talk about today is financial mobilization. As a French development agency, we identified 540 public development banks on Earth. So it's 15% of annual investment, and their main shareholders are states, and they comply with the directives provided by the states. That's the case For AFD, where our terms are defined by the Ministry of Economy and Finance and Foreign Affairs, and that's the case for most countries. All these institutions are state tool investments to serve environmental, social, and economic development. And we strongly believe that if we align the terms of all the institutions together, and if they work on farming, gender equality together, we will have this ability to strongly mobilize and do better than we do today through our current business plan. Of course, I'd like to thank the teams of the Cirad for their work, and the credits of the development policies have been decreasing, unfortunately. But we've already met on 5 occasions, and with the support of AFD, we supported the structuring of the public banks for farming with FIDA to help mobilize these institutions. And the challenge is to make sure that by tomorrow 200 million of funding will be aligned with the good practices in agroecology, and that is the term that we have for farming. We won't be able to convince everybody about the goods of family farming, but little by little, hopefully, we will manage to convince, hence the need to review and understand the narratives and provide constant support through our partnership agreements, the perfect continuity between research, farming techniques, yields, and all measures implemented to convince farmers, women and men, and help them switch to other solutions and change things. I know it's not an easy task. It's not as easy as it seems. And I think this we could have discussed much longer. Soon, the Cirad and AFD will have the great pleasure to meet you at the Agriculture International Trade and at the summit, where these issues will be discussed again at the agricultural fair. We're not very far from INRAE, so we could organize a three-party meeting. So thank you very much for your attention, and once again, I wish you a beautiful 40th anniversary. Well done. Thank you.
Bon, c'est presque fini, hein, promis.
Almost done, I promise. Now it's time for the group picture. So I'm calling all the speakers to come to the floor, to come to the stage for the group photo.
Bon, j'ai eu l'impression qu'on vous pressait beaucoup, mais comme vous le savez...
We are rushing you, but there's another conference that is soon to be held at 6 o'clock sharp. So for those who registered to Le Monde conference, please come in. But you're all invited to enjoy your cocktail on the second floor on the mezzanine. So you may take your belongings. If you choose not to stay at the conference, please take all your personal belongings with you, because many people are going to enter the auditorium. So let's meet at the cocktail. Have a good evening.
Voilà.
Merci.